So many people arrive for EMDR therapy and have no idea what that's going to look like. So today I'm going to talk you through what does an EMDR session look like, but in particular going from that very first initial visit. One of the things about EMDR, first of all, to understand is that it's one of the gold standard trauma-focused psychotherapies. What does that mean? Effectively, what it means is that EMDR looks at the presenting problem as a consequence of something which has happened to the person in their past, which we can broadly think of as being traumatic. My colleague Katie O'Shea in America would say, we can think of trauma as any threat for which the mind is not adequately prepared. And so whenever a person is presenting with a difficulty such as maybe depression or obsessive compulsive disorder or post-traumatic stress disorder, that the bottom line is that in the trauma-focused model, we would say that those things are an attempt to adapt to the problem, which is related to that earlier lived experience of trauma. We can think of trauma as being, being in a road traffic collision, for example, but we also know that things like bullying are deeply traumatic. And also when we do take a look around the world, we can also see things like poverty, and living in poverty is also deeply traumatic. So Dr. Francine Shapiro created a trauma-focused model that acknowledged that and basically said that information that isn't properly processed or fully processed and integrated to become a part of our being, of our mind and our psyche and how we look at the world, that unprocessed material creates what she called a dysfunctional memory network. And that functions a bit like the lens of my spectacles, that the person then begins to see the world through that lens. So if I have an experience where growing up it was abusive, psychologically, physically, or sexually, I may tell myself the story that I'm a bad person. The difficulty is that I'll look at every interaction through that lens now. So my interaction with a friend group, my interaction with a teacher, my interaction with a workplace employer, all comes from that place of I'm a bad person. And so EMDR then wants to sort of try and understand that. Francine created a model then with the 8 phases that guides that. So when you first come, really the initial questions will be to help you to feel comfortable in the session. So what information are you coming with? What are you coming with a specific question to say, I would like EMDR? Maybe you're being referred by another clinician to us for EMDR specifically. Or maybe you just have recognized that you have a difficulty and you want some help with that. You don't know what the help will look like. And so that's a very broad entry. The first piece then is what we call, or what Francine called in phase 1, history taking. So this is tell me your story. I often tell supervisees that they should think of this piece as the where's the ouch. And so when I worked in the emergency room as a doctor, when somebody came through the door, you asked them where it was sore. If they fell down the stairs, they had a sore leg or they had a sore arm. And this is really the same. It'll be you telling your story. Why are you here? Why now? You could have something that you, from your history, you're saying, well, that was 20 years ago. It was 20 years ago, but why now? So maybe a difficulty in a relationship or problems with work, or you just aren't able to sustain function. And so it'll be a discussion talking about the story of, how have you come to be here? Why now? What is it that's troubling you? And that history taking will be, broadly speaking, trauma informed. And we'll be specifically asking that question, what happened to you? There'll be a structure to it as well. So looking at the list of things that you're troubled with now, but we'll then do a more background history taking. This can surprise people because people may come because I have a fear about flying on a plane. So if I start asking about your childhood, people might think, well, that's a bit weird. I'm here to deal with my flying phobia. But it's because of that trauma model we understand that the difficulties that people are experiencing now are related to past lived experience. So the history taking will have a structure to it. What was your growing up like? What were the relationships like that you had growing up? We'll look specifically at a couple of measures, which are 2 little 10-question questionnaires. The first one is the Adverse Childhood Experiences Scale, and it has common adverse experiences that people have with just yes/no answers. This is the work by Vincent Felitti. I did a big study with Kaiser Permanente in the United States and showed that not only was there a link, that there was a dose response link. And what I mean by that is if you score with 3 adverse experiences, you have an increased risk of various things, including a risk to mental illness. But if you have 5, then that risk is increased accordingly. And so we see that right across the line. More recent research by Narayan and her colleagues showed that these benevolent childhood experiences are an important balancing force. And in fact, some of the research would say you can have a high ACEs score and a high BACES score. And the presence of the benevolent experiences actually correct and help the person to be much more adaptive. So this could be a person who has gone through the lived experience of childhood sexual abuse, but has then become, let's say, a police officer or a therapist wanting to help people in that category because their benevolent experiences have really helped. So we look specifically for those. In fact, research is now helping us to see that the absence of benevolent childhood experiences can actually be often more important than the presence of adverse childhood experiences. So the questions will be sort of crafted around that, but it will be hopefully quite conversational, helping the person to feel safe. There's not a lot of form filling, although we do use some to help to guide the questions. And with all of that information, then we create what we call a formulation. So why does the clinician feel you're experiencing what you're experiencing, why you're troubled by that? So that leads us on to then addressing it, and we'll be addressing it within a trauma-informed model. Largely here at the clinic, that means we'll be using EMDR, so eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy created by Dr. Francine Shapiro. But other models are used as well. So Edna Foa's work of the trauma-focused cognitive behavioral psychotherapies would also be something that will be offered. In some cases, people may need medication to help them to get into the right place to be able to do it. So this sort of takes us into Francine's work of phase 2. And phase 2 is preparation work. How can I equip you so that you are able, capable, and ready to do the therapeutic work that you need to do? And so part of that may mean bringing in new information that the person needed to know to help them to be ready to do the therapeutic work. In fairly straightforward cases, so a person with a normal, healthy attachment history that has had a really no negative mental health issues up to this point in time, and let's say they just have a very nasty road traffic collision. Well, a person like that could come and be ready quite quickly to do therapeutic work. And within EMDR, we're looking at processing the information. So we take raw data that's sort of stuck and unprocessed. We want to process that so it's integrated. Think of it almost like digestion. We take a wonderful meal, we eat that meal, but we're going to take from it what we need, integrate it into our muscles and tissues and generate energy. But there's going to be stuff that we don't use or and that gets eliminated then from the body. And so that's what we really want in terms of these unprocessed pieces. We want to digest them and process them. And so EMDR is an information processing method, and the model that Dr. Francine Shapiro and Roger Solomon created was called the Adaptive Information Processing Model, or AIP. So helping you to understand that, there'll be a bit of discussion around that, and then mapping that to your lived experience. And the preparation will be also looking at what's your context. Are you living in a stable environment? Because if you have a person who's processing, for example, domestic violence, if they're still in that domestic violence situation, some of the stuff that needs to happen outside the therapy room is making sure that there's safety for that individual. And so all of that comes under preparation, making you ready, and that's very collaborative. Medication may or may not be a part of that. But we see in the more complex cases that rather than then the road traffic collision that we used, where the person might go phase 1, history taking, phase 2, then preparation, and you're ready then to move to EMDR reprocessing, phases 3 to 7. And that could go in a fairly linear way. But if it's a more complex trauma, multiple traumas across a person's childhood or lived experience, or a series of work-related traumas, for example, then what you might find is that we go to phases 3 to 7, which we broadly refer to as EMDR reprocessing. But then we might need to go back again and do a little bit more preparation. So it's more of a spiral that a person goes through, and the more complex the case, the more likely that will be. That will probably be the majority of what happens in your first session. Again, different clinicians will work in slightly different ways. It could be 1 hour or it could be 90 minutes, but that is really getting you ready. Phases 3 to 7 are the heavy lifting of the trauma work. Some people, when we look at the work of trauma-informed psychotherapies, this sort of preparation work and getting a person ready and equipping them leads to then what broadly they refer to as trauma confrontation, so dealing with the nub of the problem. And in terms of phases 3 to 7, phase 3 is what we're doing to make all the other things happen. So we want to be doing 3 core activities. We're identifying and activating a memory network. Once it's active, we know that makes it vulnerable to change. So then in phases 3 to 7, we're then changing that traumatic material, and then we're stabilizing it again at the end. And what Francine realized was that when we process and take the sting out of the tail of the stuff that we're activating in phase 3, once we're doing the desensitization part, we then also need to replace it with a positive, because we can't just leave a vacuum. So I used to think that childhood sexual abuse meant that I was a bad person. We desensitize that, and Francine realized, well, we need to put something in its place. So the person then maybe comes up with a thought that they think, well, I look at what happened to me and that was terrible, and I survived it, it's over. Or even maybe moving as far as being able to say, I'm a good person. I know now I'm a good person. I feel that I'm a good person. And so what Francine noticed was that according to the neurobiology and the theories at the time, that the natural arbiter for that is the body. And so connecting to the body, once we desensitize it, we go to the body and say, well, how does that feel now? So your therapy is, yes, involving some discussion, but once you get to the EMDR desensitization, you may find, compared to other therapies, if you've been in other therapy, that there isn't a lot of talking. That what you're seeing is that with the bilateral stimulation that is a part of the EMDR method, and that could be simply eye movements, so follow my fingers. It could be the person doing knee taps, or indeed the individual themselves doing tapping on the shoulders or on the tops of the arms or on their own knees. If they're in the room with the individual, or if it's being done online, the person themselves, you doing the tapping, or that there might be a little piece of technology that you're watching through a certain platform and there's a little light moving backwards and forwards. And that is simply to process the information. We know that what that does, well, firstly, I should say, people hear about eye movements and they think, okay, is this hypnosis? Am I going to lose control? So the first thing is, it's a different brain state to hypnosis. What we're saying is that the part of the brain that tells us about alarm and alert, we're sort of dialing the sensitivity back of that. And when we look at the traumatic image, we'll use the example of a road traffic collision again. When you come into the room, you might be able to completely not avoid thinking about it. It's right here in front of you. And whenever we do the bilateral stimulation part of the method during desensitization, what we see is that part of the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex, that we see a decrease in the vividness and emotional charge, if we can call it, to the memory of the road traffic collision, but also an ability to distance and notice. And so that desensitization, then you'll experience that in the session. And at the end of the session, we check in the body, has that been fully dealt with? Sometimes it is fully dealt with. We just close the session down. Sometimes it's incomplete, and then that you come back again after usually a week or 2 weeks. It would be quite typical. And at that stage then, phase 8 is about going back and saying, well, we worked on that material last week, what's it like for you now? So you can expect these topics to be revisited, to not have a lot of talking, and also importantly, there is no homework, so you don't have to go away and do stuff. You aren't listening to tapes of the session or any of that in between times. Your therapist will then make sure that they're journeying with you to make sure all the different memory targets that they might discover with you are dealt with. And so that broadly brings you through your phases 1 through 8. The other part of the process Francine referred to was the 3-pronged protocol. All that simply means is past, present and future. So past is looking at what are the events in the past. We use the example of the road traffic collision. Present are then looking at present day triggers. When I go out to my car, or even when I look at my car keys, I start to get sweaty and my heart beats fast. So we're looking at what are present day triggers for the individual. How is this showing up as dysfunction in your life? And then the last thing that we look at is the future template. There are 2 aspects to this. We can look at building an idealized future. How do you like your life to look like going forward? But also we see that the research tells us that for people that have a refractory or seemingly non-responsive condition, that often there's material in the future that hasn't been processed, and sometimes that can be a future catastrophization. So a person with a road traffic collision now believes that if I think about myself driving to work again, I just see myself having another road traffic collision, or I can't trust anybody else on the road. And so they have this catastrophic expectation, which becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so there is therapeutic work needs to be done. And so we find that the past, the present and the future, as Francine Shapiro created, gives us then an ability to work in all those areas and process. So your sessions will have a fairly standard form that you'll eventually feel comfortable with. And as I say, in single instant traumas with a good attachment, good mental health history in the past, that could be as short as 3 or 6 sessions. But if you're somebody who's had like long, multiple traumas in the workplace or in childhood, then the bottom line is that that might be more of a spiral and be repeated through. But you'll learn the passage of that and what it looks like, and that will help you then feel comfortable within the model.